Well, my name is Tripp. I'm the pastor here at Ridge Church, and I've been here in this area for a couple of decades now. That seems like a long time. But even longer ago, when I was growing up, I lived in Georgia. I'm a Georgia boy at heart. Grew up in a place called Statesboro, Georgia. Anybody familiar with that, Statesboro? Anybody have the Statesboro Blues? Yeah, just, okay. Thank you, all my brothers. Grew up in Statesboro, going to First United Methodist Church. That's where I grew up, in Statesboro. And it's actually where my mom had attended church since, a senior in high school, somewhere around there when they moved to Statesboro. And a lot of my family still went there when I was young. And then, even till a couple of years ago when my grandmother passed, she was still attending there. And so this church has a long-time connection with our family. And so there's just a lot of history there, if you know what I'm saying. So this is what it looks like inside First United Methodist in Statesboro, okay? And I mean, it's pretty. It's gorgeous. Come on, that's amazing. I mean, this is really, that's really it. I mean, people built this. It's crazy. You look at that and it's like, really? Built back in the 50s, very Gothic. Of course, when I was a kid, I didn't appreciate all the intricate little details, and all of the, the beautiful stonework and the arches and all that. I didn't appreciate it, because I just kind of thought it was cold and boring. I mean, that was, to be honest with you, that's just how I felt. But still, really pretty. But what's really gorgeous are these stained glass windows. And I do remember thinking, they were intriguing to me. In matter of fact, I would pay more attention to stained glass windows than I did the preacher usually when I was really young. I just kind of look, and they were amazing, and I would try to figure things out. And there's a stained glass window in each of these archways down these galleys. But then all the way at the end is this big stained glass window, and it's beautiful. In the mornings when the light's coming through there, and the thousands of little pieces are lighting up and it really is pretty impressive and awe-inspiring. And even as a kid, though, I would look at these and I would try to figure out, what is it all really made up of? Because, you look at it from back here, and we're familiar with stained glass windows. Come on, we're in the Southeast. Every church had these. But a lot of stained glass windows, what I learned as I got older is that they weren't all like these. Some of them aren't very pretty. Matter of fact, some of them are just kind of random collections of glass pieces that are very colorful, but they don't really tell a story. They're just kind of pretty stained glass windows. Well, but what you saw in these windows is when you get real close, because it just looks like, hey, that's pretty and colorful, but you get up close, and it's kind of grainy here, but you can see that there's all these little pictures, these little biblical scenes inside of these, and you've seen some like this, but that was unique. Matter of fact, it was a little mesmerizing to me. I would walk around as a kid. I remember doing this, and I know, this is just what I did. And I would walk around, and I would try to figure out, what that scene was. And some were more obvious than others. Sometimes it was just two dudes standing there, and you just have to kind of guess, and you didn't ever really know. But this was the kind of a close-up view of the one in the middle. And so all of these are about the life of Jesus, and they're kind of telling that story. And that's the way these worked, and I would try to figure it out. But really, that's kind of how, this is what I thought about as I got older, that's really how Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John operate, isn't it? That's kind of how they're structured as well. It's there's all these random pieces and stories and collections of characters that all tell kind of one big story. And they're put together, and they kind of seem random and meaningless on their own. As a matter of fact, each of the Gospels have kind of a different flavor. They have a different feel, and they're written a little bit differently by different people. And sometimes they include the same stories in all four accounts, but then other times one will tell a story that the other ones leave out, and sometimes characters are involved that aren't in others. And it's a little strange. And I used to think, I wonder why that is. I wonder why certain stories are included. How did they decide? There's so many opportunities, and options to choose from. I wonder how they decided what to put in the stained glass. And then I wonder that about the gospel writers too, because there's obviously a lot more to the story than just what they tell. And so I wonder why they chose certain things. And here's the thing. If you look at any one by themselves, it's just kind of like a random piece of glass in a stained glass window. It's, you're too close to be able to see the big picture, so to speak. It's like, okay, so that's maybe, a story about Jesus' birth. I think this is maybe like a baby and, Joseph and Mary. And then, I think it goes down like that. And this is, Jesus' feet when he's being crucified. And then I think like he makes it heaven or over here. I think that's what it is. And so I kind of figured out. But you almost have to realize that you've got to back up to see that it's not just a bunch of random stories that are kind of meaningless and disconnected. It's actually telling the same story. That when you put them all together, and that's the way a stained glass window works. You put all the stories together and it tells one big story. And that story ultimately is about Jesus. I mean, when you really back way up and you see, okay, like everything, like all of the gospel writers, they tell a lot of different stories in a lot of different ways, but ultimately the reason they're put together is because they're all telling really the same story about the person of Jesus. So in this series, over the next 6 weeks together, actually leading up to Easter, even Easter morning, we're going to be taking just a handful of seemingly random stories and looking at some of the characters that are involved in this, people who had encounters with Jesus. Some are named, others go unnamed. But we're going to be looking at some of these stories. We are going to figure out, some application, some things that apply to our lives. We're going to learn some things together. But then on Easter, we're going to figure out how all of these end up together. Like how each of these stories aren't just random stories being told, but ultimately how they fit together and how God is really taking those pieces and telling one big story. That there's a bigger picture than just what we see sometimes. And that's what we have to make sure we don't miss. So today, we're going to start with a guy you should be very familiar with. His name is John. Matter of fact, this is where we begin the story. It just begins like this. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. Now, this is not John who's writing. This is John the apostle who's writing. But he's writing about John, or somebody you may know as John the Baptist. But John the Baptizer is maybe a clearer way to say that, because I remember growing up, I would look around and I would think, so why is he John the Baptist? Why couldn't he be John the Methodist, or John the Presbyterian? I don't understand. Anybody ever, when you were young, I know nobody now. Nobody would admit that now. But like way back when, it was like, yeah, I wondered. Some of you are like, really? Have to look that up later. So really, it's just, he was John, the one who baptized people. It was just like, this is how he got labeled, just to distinguish from other Johns, I guess. This is the one. This was the forerunner. He was out preaching and he was teaching, and he was a little crazy. He lived in the wilderness. He was alone a lot, and he ate bugs, and he just, did some weird things. And so, he drew a lot of attention to himself, and he was preaching this message of repentance. And then he was baptizing people. And of course, it drew crowds. Anytime you were saying, this, the promised one, the Messiah, as you may know, is somebody that the Jews had been waiting on for a couple thousand years. These were promises that, I don't know if you've ever waited for anything for like a couple of weeks. This is something they had been waiting on for centuries on end. And so for somebody to show up, and this had happened before, so, those things had been done away with. And so now they're wondering, here's another guy talking about, hey, the time has come, the Messiah is here. And so some of the religious leaders wanted to go out, and do away with this, because there's crowds, and anytime there's crowds, it means that there's somebody who is doing more influencing than they are. They don't like that. And then it also potentially means that riots could ensue, and so that's a problem because of the tedious, relationship with Rome and the Roman occupation that was happening during the time. So it was a difficult period, and so the religious leaders of the day from Jerusalem, they send some of their guys to go investigate. And they begin to ask John, hey, are you saying that you're the Messiah? And of course, John immediately is like, are you kidding me? No. He could have said, yeah, because he had a crowd, and if he was making it up, why not go for it, Just go all in. But he didn't. He said, no, it's not me, it's somebody else. As a matter of fact, this is where we'll pick up the story. As a matter of fact, the next day, John saw Jesus as he was being grilled about these things, coming toward him. He was down in the river and he was baptizing people, and he sees Jesus coming along the shore, and he says, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. That's the guy. That's the one you want. He's what, take the attention off of me. I want you to point toward him. This is the one. Here, you just don't do that. Like if you have ministry, if you have a following, if you have influence, you don't just take all of that and point the attention at someone else. if you're really all about yourself. Instead, he really believed that this was the guy, that this was the Messiah. And I mean, that's a bold prediction considering his situation. I mean, he was risking it all, like not just his livelihood or his profession or his influence. He was risking his life to be imprisoned or to be stoned or put to death somehow. I mean, that was a very, very much a reality. And yet he's convinced. Notice that? I mean, he's convinced. Absolutely. This is him. And what's interesting is that they're actually cousins. Did you know that? There's some relation between Mary and Elizabeth, and they're close somehow, family-wise, and so they were born. Jesus and John were born just a few months apart. John was a little bit older, and so they ended up, probably knowing each other when they were younger or growing up years. I don't know. Maybe they, skied together on the Sea of Galilee. I don't know. Like they vacationed a little bit. I said in the first service, Jesus was probably a great barefoot skier. Like, that's funny to me. Nobody got it. So maybe you're smarter than the early crowd. I don't know. Or you're just more awake. Who thought they were coming to the early service but ended up coming to the second service today? Just be honest. There we go. Got some honest people in here. So John just points to Jesus. He takes the attention off of himself. And so Jesus, sure enough, he gets in the water and he gets baptized by John. And then Jesus takes off and he goes on a vacation out in the wilderness, for 40 days, if you know the story. And he spends some time in solitary, he spends some time alone. He's being tempted by Satan as the story goes. And then by the time Jesus gets back, he gets some news about John. He hears what has happened. His situation has changed, and this is what he hears. When Jesus heard that John had been put in prison. So John, now, just a few weeks later, finds himself in prison. Jesus hears the news. Well, here's why John, I think this is interesting. Maybe find a little humor in this. I think that helps the story go along. So to know why he's in prison, I think is interesting. Because at the time, he was not just talking generally about sin and this need for repentance and to turn and forgiveness and all of this and God's judgment. Instead, he was very specific. Like he was calling sin out. Matter of fact, there were some political leaders and he was calling them out in the midst of everything that was going on. And I mean, that's, you just don't do that nowadays. It's like, freedom of speech. You can say what you want here in our country. Then, not so much. You just don't do that. He was calling out the sin specifically of King Herod at the time. Now, you may be familiar with that name, but King Herod Antipas is the Herod that we're speaking of here. And let me just give you the very quick snapshot of family line here. Herod the Great is actually the Herod from the Christmas story. He's the one that had all of the 2-year-old boys and younger slaughtered. And so you may be familiar with that story. Well, he was the one who was in charge when Jesus was born. But then he had several sons. It wasn't just these two guys. But he had 3 or 4 sons. And he just named them all Herod. Like that was all we'll just call him Herod. He had like a George Foreman kind of complex. It's like, I don't know. I can't think of it anymore. Just say George, And that's kind of what it was. I don't know if it was like an ego thing or what. But he just named them Herod Antipas, and then we'll go Herod Philip. And, since he was the oldest, he ended up receiving and becoming king. But over, remember, Israel was divided still at this time, very divided, even more so than hundreds of years before. But he really was the king of Galilee, okay? So the area north of kind of the northern kingdom, so to speak, the northern part of Israel. And then also kind of this Perea is what it's called, this area east of the Jordan River, okay? And so that's really what he's over. And he's the Herod that Jesus is sent to by Pontius Pilate, if you remember. Like fast forwarding a little bit. That's this Herod, okay? Here's what's interesting, though. So this is the one, and remember, Jesus is from Galilee, and he grew up in Nazareth, okay? And so he knows who Herod is. John knows this too, and he's the one calling out. Well, here's the situation. His brother, really half-brother, Herod Philip, had married, you ready for this? A woman named Herodias. Yeah, even her name was a Herod, okay? It's like Herodias, Herodias, Herodina, just like, we'll just go with whatever comes out. So Herodias, but here's what's really interesting. This is a little kind of Mississippi, Alabama deliverance thing going on here. You ready? So Herodias was actually their niece. Like, you don't even hear about that much here. It's like, ew. I mean, it is kind of a Mississippi thing. Like, I guess if you're from Mississippi, like, maybe it's not that weird. But I don't know. Maybe Cajun country. I mean, this is strange. Anyway, so I don't know. Do you call her honey? Do you call her, hey, niece? I mean, like, how do you refer to? I wonder that. So Herod Philip, then some time passed, and he takes like a business trip to Rome, and he's gone. Well, here's what's really interesting. Herodias then decides to ditch Philip, and Antipas and Herodias fall in love, and they end up getting married. She, discounts her marriage to Philip. He was married at the time too, and he gets rid of that marriage, and they get married. So it's like, I don't know, something about this niece was mesmerizing. And this was a scandal, even in their period of time. And this was wrong. They knew it was wrong, but everybody knew about it. This wasn't news to anybody. I mean, he was king. What was anybody going to do about it anyway? Well, John was calling him out. Like, he was just saying it like it was, using their affair as an example of how not to live and what not to do. I mean, yeah, go for it. Well, Herod Antipas didn't actually, it sounds like he didn't really care that much. Herodias didn't think it was that funny, though. And she had John arrested and put in prison, but not just any prison. This wasn't like, a comfort suite down in Jerusalem, okay? She had him sent to the easternmost, like east of the Jordan River, to like out in the desert, to this dungeon in a place called Machaerus. And there John sits. And he's wondering, what am I doing here? And that is the news. That's the news that Jesus gets at the beginning of his ministry. Like, he gets out of the wilderness and he's getting ready to, I wonder where John is, what's happened to John. Oh, he has been put in prison for, being a little too vocal, and he's down in Machaerus. And so naturally, Jesus gets the news, and like any good cousin, like any good family member, don't you know, what does he do? Like, well, surely he goes to visit him, right? And takes him some flowers and maybe some food and, some loaves and some fish. Why not? There's probably extra. He's done some things, like why not just go visit? I don't know. But instead, this is what Matthew records for us. When Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he withdrew to Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum. Now, that doesn't mean much when you just kind of reading it, but you got to see this on a map to like get that visual, like, ew, why would he do that? And this is one of those details that makes me actually buy into Scripture. I think this helps validate some of these kind of details, help validate what we're reading here. Because if you were making stuff up about this guy Jesus and you actually wanted people to believe that he was the Son of God and it wasn't actually true, you don't put details like this in there. Oh, and Jesus was the Son of God and God loves him so much. And so when he heard that his cousin was in prison, he just left. And not just left, look, check this out. This is Nazareth. This is kind of the area of Galilee. This is Perea that we were talking about. Jerusalem here, you kind of got your feel, Mediterranean Sea. This is Machaerus. Still there today. You can go there today. I mean, this, that's like a foot and a half. That's a long way. And upon hearing about his imprisonment, Jesus goes to Capernaum, on the northern end of the Sea of Galilee. He goes like in the opposite direction. It's like, were you not far enough away? So much so that when you heard about it, you actually had to go the other way. You ever felt that way? Do you feel like sometimes that you are stuck out in a desert dungeon and God is actually moving in the opposite direction? You ever felt that way? Maybe you feel that way now. And I imagine John began to feel this way because a year to a year and a half passed. Matthew doesn't pick up the story for 7 more chapters. And then he picks back up. And Jesus has done a bunch of stuff since then. He's been growing his ministry. He's been healing people. He's been walking on some water. He's been doing all kinds of things, doing miracles, setting people free, doing unbelievable, casting out demons. The lame could walk. The blind could see. And John begins to hear about some of this. All the while, he's sitting out in this dungeon doing nothing. And it's kind of like, what in the world? And so while he's there, John decides, I think I'll send some people to ask some questions, and wouldn't you? He had his own disciples. He had people who were following him, and it was a good thing because more than likely, nobody would have taken care of him in prison. This is one of those places where you went to die. They weren't feeding you while you were there. So if you didn't have people who came to visit you, you didn't eat. So when John, who was in prison, and this is literally 7 chapters later, this is a year to a year and a half later, he heard about the deeds of the Messiah, things that Jesus was doing, and he sent his disciples to ask him, are you the one? Are you it? Are you the one who is to come? Or should we expect someone else? And why wouldn't you? He just began to doubt himself. He began to wonder, what am I doing here? It was one thing for him not to come like that first week or so, but now rumor has it that he's super busy. And he seems to not care at all. After all, wouldn't you comply? This was family member. This was a cousin of Jesus. They were close. This was the one who had risked it all for Jesus' sake and pointed out. He was the one who recognized that Jesus is the Messiah first. He had laid it all on the line. He was the one. And so don't you know, and now he's sitting here rotting in prison. Don't you think John was thinking, well, why haven't you set me free? You've been really busy doing all kinds of things. You've been setting other people free. You've been healing people. You've been performing all of these miracles, casting out demons. Why haven't you come why not come visit me, set me free? Let's go do something. Can't we do this together? He began to doubt, like you and I probably do. We tend to have questions and doubts when we're just not real sure because we can't see the whole picture. We just see all the bits and pieces and we don't see how it fits together and we don't know where God is and it seems like he's not present. And so these guys, they come up to see him. John sends them. He's like, just go ask him, did we get this right? Am I miscued here? Is there somebody else that we should be waiting on? Because I was preaching and teaching that it was you, but now based on what I'm hearing, I'm just not sure anymore. You ever felt that way? Why? Is this all we can really expect of the promised one? For you to spend your time, not even in the religious epicenter in Jerusalem, around people of influence. You're spending all of your time with a bunch of irreligious sinners and tax collectors up in Galilee, a bunch of commoners, a bunch of regular people. Why are you spending your time there and healing them and even the majority of your time with just this ragamuffin band of followers? Why in the world? Is this all we've got? If you're God in flesh, then why didn't you just handle everything in a week? This just seems so weird. And he's writing, he sends these guys, and he's like, I just want to know, are you the one who is to come? And Jesus sends them back with his message. You just tell him he can keep on believing. You tell him to keep on believing in me because of the things that I've been doing for other people. You just tell him because I've been healing people. You tell him about all the people that I've set free. Tell him about all of the things that I've done, the miracles that I've performed. You just go tell him about all of the things that I've been doing. In other words, Jesus was telling John this. Tell John that he can keep on believing in me because of all the things I've been doing for everybody else. Isn't this how you and I feel sometimes? So you're telling me that even though it feels like my prayers aren't being answered and everybody else's are, like I'm stuck in this prison, rotting, doing nothing, and it seems like there's no hope and that nobody cares, especially my Heavenly Father, my Messiah, my Savior, the one who is to come. It seems like things aren't going to work out. And here I am. You're doing everything for everybody else and nothing's happening for me. You ever felt that way? And you look around and it's so easy to be resentful. It's so easy to get angry and bitter, isn't it? It's so easy to compare. to look around and see what everybody else has and how everybody else is living their lives and what everybody else is driving and what kind of house they have and how their kids are performing and, what kind of marriage they seem to have. And it just seems like everything's working out for everybody else, but my prayers aren't being answered. And God doesn't seem present, and he seems silent, and things just aren't panning out. And that's how John felt. That's how you and I feel. And Jesus just tells him, look, you just remind him he can keep on trusting in me because of what I'm doing for everybody else. And then he puts this little statement. Matthew includes the statement that Jesus ended this message with. And this is so powerful. I love these words. You tell him, blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me, Jesus is saying to John. In other words, blessed is anyone who keeps on trusting, even when you don't understand. Blessed is anyone who continues to have faith in me and to believe in me, even when circumstances are going in the other direction, even when things seem like they're not working out, even when it feels like I'm not present, even when it feels like I'm not around and that I don't care and that I don't know your name, that I don't know your situation. Even then, those who continue to believe in me will be blessed in spite of what they see. Blessed is anyone who continues to put their faith and their trust in me in spite of me, in spite of how it feels, in spite of what things look like. In other words, kind of in my own words, I think this is what Jesus was telling John and is telling you and me. Do not get tripped up on your own limited understanding and your preconceived expectations of who Jesus is and what he should do. That's what happens all the time. Because we are finite beings, because we have limited knowledge, limited understanding, because we're so close that we can only see all of the bits and the shards and the broken glass and all of the little colorful pieces in our lives, and it looks like there's no big story here. It looks like nothing is really happening that's worth anything. And he's saying, that just means that you have some of the information, John. You know some of the things that I've been doing and some of the things about me, but it's still not the whole story. There is a bigger picture. You have limited understanding, and you also had a preconceived expectation of what I would do and who I am and what I'm here for. Don't allow those things to trip you up. Blessed is anyone who continues to trust in me in spite of that. And the reason that we can do that is because we know the one who's taking all of the pieces and putting them together. That's the difference. You don't have to understand what the picture is going to look like in order to trust in the one who does. The one who's taking all of the pieces and who's creating the stained glass window that we long to see. And Jesus was just reminding John of that. I know that you only have some of the information. I know it feels like things aren't working out. And as a matter of fact, they didn't for John. He never got out of prison. And he ended up losing his life at the hands of Herodias and their daughter because of some things that took place. And that's another story. Unbelievable, though. I mean, here, things didn't look like they were working out, but I wonder if his faith was not renewed, even though things never got restored about his circumstances. He never was set free. Nothing changed. But he continued to trust in the one who could see the big picture and was putting the pieces together. Now, here's the thing. This is easier said than done. Right? Amen? Anybody? Easier said than done. Oh, you're just telling me, like, regardless of what's going on in my life, I'm just supposed to trust in the one who knows what's going on. Yeah. Here's the thing. Let me just be real with you. If you've ever felt like you've gone through dark times, I've gone through them too. If you've ever felt like you've had some really serious questions about God, Jesus, the Bible. I promise I have had them as well. If you've ever felt like you've had some serious doubts about things, let me just tell you, my doubts have been bigger. And here's why I say that. Because I have to think about this stuff all the time. And we're all busy and we all have lives. And, like this is kind of a Sunday thing for many people. But I get paid to have to think about this stuff. It's like I'm supposed to think about it. And so I feel like I'm disingenuous by getting on this stage if I haven't thought through all of the potential questions and doubts that you may grapple with. I'm not doing you any favors by getting up here and just kind of like faking it. And I don't want to be that kind of pastor that gets up here and acts like things are good and I believe everything. I've just never I don't have an issue anymore, because I grew up and I'm really old now and things. As a matter of fact, it's like the opposite. You know what I'm saying? The older you get, the more I look into things, the more I'm digging and, the more I think about things. And I'm like, oh man, I've got so many questions, so many things, so many difficulties. And then I sit down with some of you and I hear your story and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't know that there's a way out. And I'm just telling you, I think that the best thing that I can do is to grapple with some of these things so that I can get up in front of you and I can tell you, yes, you can still trust in your Heavenly Father in spite of that. Blessed is the one who continues to trust in spite of me, in spite of Jesus, in spite of what it feels like he is or isn't doing and who he is or isn't supposed to be. And some of you are in that. See, that's what I know. I have to get up on this stage, and I know and you know that everybody in here at some point in their life, maybe even right now, are going to go through a season of life or you're in the middle of a circumstance, and it feels like there's no way out, there's no answer, and it ain't getting any better. Nothing's going to change. And some of you are going, he's been stalking my house. How does he know that? Because you're human. We all experience this. And some of you are sitting here today and that's exactly what you're thinking. You're looking around and you're like, I am in a situation and it looks like there's really not a good solution. There's not a good answer. And I would sit down with you and I would hear your story and I'd probably go, oh my goodness, you're right. I hurt with you. I feel the same way. I'm not real sure what to do. I don't know that there's a good answer. I don't know that anything will change. For you, maybe it's a marriage, and you're hearing this and you're going, yeah, it's my marriage. And things were great at one point in our lives, but now we don't see eye to eye anymore. It just seems like we're so different now. All we do is fight, and we, bicker all the time, and just things aren't good, and it just doesn't feel like it's going to get any better. There's just too much water under the bridge, or maybe it's a relationship, a parent with a child or child with a parent, and there's just too many things have been said, it feels like. Stuff's gotten said, and there's bitterness and resentment, and it's like you don't know. I guess nothing's going to change because I don't know what to do to fix it. And I'm going, I'm not real sure either. Maybe it's professionally. Your job, it's job related. Maybe something at work, that you didn't want to be a part of and you knew it and so something was going on. You didn't want to be a part of it and you ended up losing your job. You got fired and things didn't work out. Matter of fact, you've gotten to a place now where it's so bad you don't even know that you can be back in that industry because of the way things operate or because you've been blackballed or so you might have to move to another city. And it just looks terrible. It's just like there's no way out. I just can't win for losing. That's how you feel. Maybe it's in the area of finances. Maybe it's education. I don't know what it is for you, what the circumstance is. But I do know what it feels like to feel like there's no answer, there's no way out, nothing's going to change, and therefore there just seems to be no hope. And so, like John, you've begun to feel stranded, like you're stuck out in a desert dungeon somewhere, and Jesus is nowhere to be found, and he's chilling up in Capernaum, hanging out in his hometown, building his ministry. Here's what I want you to know today. First, you can be a follower of Jesus and still have doubts and still feel overwhelmed. Permission granted. Doesn't mean you need to hang out there, but you can follow Jesus. You can put your faith in Jesus honestly, and still deal with doubts and questions and concerns and feel overwhelmed by the situation around you, by the way that, our country's going and things aren't going good, and coronavirus and, political landscape, and there's no good options, and, the whole thing. Everybody on Facebook, and the weather and tornadoes and hurricanes, and it just doesn't look good. School shootings, church shootings, you name it. You can feel overwhelmed and have some doubts and still follow Jesus. Why? Because as a believer, the foundational truth here is that Jesus is always with you. Jesus is always present. And it's what he was reminding John. You may not see the big picture. You may not know how all of this fits together and how all of this works. You may feel like it's just a bunch of broken glass laying around on the ground. But I'm just telling you, while you don't see all of the information, you see some of it. But I know what this is going to look like one day. And so I just want you to trust me. Because if there is a God who does love you, and you've put your faith in him, you haven't put your faith in him fixing things or answering prayers. You've put your faith in the fact that he's with you and that you can trust him and that he loves you and that he does see everything, that he does have a plan, that he does have a purpose for your life. And that even when things seem bleak and you're stuck in that prison and things aren't working out and it looks like there isn't a way out and it feels like there is no hope and it feels like he's silent, you can know that he's not silent. Even when a season of life feels like God is absent, you can know he's not absent. When he feels like he's not active, you can know that God is always active. God knows your name, he knows your story, and he loves you. Period. And that is the foundation. That's why you can go. That's what happens when you see somebody go through something. You're like, I don't know how they're making it through that. I don't know how they're going through that season and still trusting Jesus. Well, I can promise you this. It's not because Jesus spoke to them one night and gave them the answer. It's okay. It's going to be all right in about 473 days. Just hang in there. No. It's because they just trust that Jesus is with them. Period. That's their starting point. That's why you can go through even a dark day, a difficult season, and come out on the other side in a relationship with Jesus. This is the bottom line. You do not have to see the big picture to trust that Jesus is the one putting the pieces together. Just hang on to that. You do not. Matter of fact, if you're waiting around on getting all of your questions answered and your doubts done away with, you'll never put faith in Jesus. It'll never happen. Because on this side of heaven, you'll never have all your questions answered. Well, tell me about Jonah. I don't understand how somebody could I'm just telling you, nobody's going to satisfy that answer for you. Where's the ark? If there really was, a flood and, the geological, surveys don't tell it. It's like, okay, if that's what you're waiting on, then you'll always be waiting. Asking the wrong question. The question is, do you trust in who Jesus is? Because if you do, then he's always with you. And here's why we know that, and it's because of the cross. You see, at the cross, on the cross, God left no room to believe that Jesus doesn't love you. Because on the cross, he put all of his anger and judgment that we deserved on his own son. And he eliminated the potential to think that he doesn't love us. He loves us that much. And knowing that he loves you is the key. Knowing that you can trust him is the key. Not getting all your questions answered, I promise you. Not trying to argue with an atheist, or trying to argue your way out of a, scenario. That's not going to do it for you. I spend plenty of my days, chewing on that information and reading books and considering those things. But what it always boils down to for me is, but do I believe in who Jesus is? And I do. And I know he loves me. And I know he's always with me.